I'm going to go ahead and call the Transportation and Public Safety Budget meeting to order. One of the things I just want to mention to the committee, we'll be getting an updated agenda for next week. I think we're going to try to move the Department of Corrections budget recommendations to Wednesday, be the same time as transportation. I don't think it'll take very long, and then we'll have Thursday available for other things. I'm sorry, from Thursday to Wednesday. On Tuesday, we're doing budget recommendations for the Kansas Highway Patrol and bids. Are you going to be gone those days? Okay. I bet you we'll get you in and out pretty quick on those things. It went pretty fast. So with that, I want to make a little variance to the agenda. You know, we're very lucky to have a large number of JAG participants and their leaders here with us today. And I think we're going to have a very, very short presentation at the beginning or an introduction by Chuck Knapp. And then we're going to get to hear a little bit real quickly about what Devin Unger at Augusta has experienced. So Chuck, Devin, if you guys want to come forward real quickly.
Chairman Francis, members of the committee, thank you for allowing us to appear before you today. We're testifying in support of the corrections component that funds JAG-K, $3.5 million. You know about the program. We're an evidence-based program with outstanding results. I could give you data all day, which I know you do not want me to do. So we have brought our State Career Association president, Devin Russell Unger from Augusta High School. We wanted him to share with you his story and why we believe JAG-K is a tremendous prevention program, preventing students from getting into the juvenile justice system.
Thank you, Chuck, and welcome to the committee, Devin.
Thank you so much for having me today, everyone. It's an honor to be speaking in front of everyone and all of my colleagues and peers back there. It's so hard to begin of what JAG has done for me. I come from a very hard lifestyle. I moved around a lot. I was involved in the foster care system for quite some time, and as we all know, that's quite a rough system. And one of the main things that I remember feeling was anger. I had a lot of energy, but behind that energy was anger. Not knowing where to distinguish it, I didn't feel like my voice mattered, and I didn't feel like I had any passion behind my voice because it didn't matter. But when I come to a place like today and I'm talking in front of very important people and I'm talking in front of my colleagues and they're wanting me, they're depending on me, and it makes me feel like, man, I actually matter. So speaking in front of important people has kind of fueled my fire. I started public speaking a very long time ago. In 5th grade, I started to get up and speak in a little bit of public debate. And still then, I went into foster care, and that's when I started to spiral. I didn't really care about school. I didn't care about whose feelings I hurt. I just wanted to get through and get my revenge on whoever was there and whoever hurt me. I let it bring me down, and I let it tear me down. But what JAG has done for me is something tremendous, and it's part of my testimony for today. Not only has God helped me, but God has set JAG in front of me. And JAG being the way, the truth, and how I live my life every single day. I live with passion. Instead of that anger fueling negative thoughts and emotions, it's brought me here today to speak in front of important people once more. It's brought me to feel that positivity that I've always wanted to have, that positive influence. And to me, it's always been a circle of doubt for me. Am I going to actually be successful in life? Because unlike any other program, JAG is actually there to get a way out and set the correct foundation for people out there. And since the foundation isn't set out there for kids who were like me, we were left in the dust. It's said that 55% of foster kids are invested less than what that of a normal kid is. And 50% is the graduation rate so far. So JAG is solving for both of those situations, which only goes to continue to show that JAG is doing its part, especially through me. A lot of my friends would say, or a lot of my old friends would say, I wouldn't be in a situation like this today. because of who I was back then, because I didn't care about anybody, because I didn't care about furthering my education. I just wanted to get back. But now here I am. I'm using my voice and my actions to represent well. One of my favorite quotes is, "A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way." And I hope I can do that to all of my other peers, showing them that there is proper steps out there. There is JAG out there, and I will advocate any day about how good JAG is for you and how good JAG can be for you. We all have our problems in life, and that's okay. Because Jag has taught me, let those problems happen. Let it be the foundation that you step on. Let your testimony be the story and the will to bind others to live up to their standards, not anybody else's standards. So today, I challenge you today. If we can save a few problems in this world and this political life, that being helping foster kids or kids in poor communities or everyday citizens who just need that extra kick to do better and to be great and not to be average, then why not take those extra steps now? And why not continue to be great? I love Jack K, and they're my family. Family is something that I didn't have much, but I'm glad I have them today, and I'm glad that they've pushed me to be here. From taking me all the way to DC to speak in front of multiple governors, to taking me here to speaking in front of this council. It's my passion, and it's what I care for. Maybe one day I'll be a specialist. Maybe one day I'll be someone like Chuck. But I know for now, at least, that I can be great. Thank you.
Thank you. And Devin, could you stay up here in case any other members of the committee have any questions for you for just a moment? Does anybody have any questions for Devin? Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No questions, but a comment. Outstanding job, young man. Glad you made it.
Thank you.
Anybody? Representative Ellis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What do you do in JAG? What's your specialty or?
So I'm the JAG student state president. So I help represent Kansas and even my region. And I don't know. I've had my voice heard in board meetings before and stuff, and from a different standpoint. And I've got to talk to and represent JAG at least in Kansas well, to my understanding.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for being here today, Devin. What's next
What do you
for
mean?
you?
For me, like in life?
Mm-hmm.
I plan on going to WSU. I'm gonna probably double major in business management and probably political science. Just want to get my foundation out there and see where it takes me with 2 degrees and stuff like that and the work.
Outstanding. I can't wait to see where it takes you also.
Well, thank you again, Devin, and you did an outstanding job. And thanks for sharing with us the importance of JAG in your life. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
All right. So we're going to continue where we left off yesterday afternoon. Merle Riedel is going to be giving us an update on the fiscal year 2023 portion of the Department of Corrections budget.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we'll continue with the Department of Corrections budget for looking at FY 2023. I did just want to follow up on a few items that were brought up yesterday. Representative Delperdang was asked about FTE count, and I wanted to give you a more specific response. If you look on page 30, it does break down the FTE count by facility. So it's a little more clear that rather than trying to shuffle through each individual correctional facility, kind of gives you an overall picture there. It also above on that table, in the upper portion of that table, gives you an idea of the appropriations that will be allocated to each of those correctional facilities. So it breaks it down a little bit more there. The other question was the FTE count relating to the Lansing Correctional Facility, which had new units constructed in recent years. And I did go back and look. The FTE count, so the new Lansing Correctional Facility, new units were completed in FY 2020. So looking at the actual FTE count in 2018, was 684 FTE positions. 2019 was 685 FTE positions. In FY 2020, the year that the new facility was completed, that count dropped to 525 FTE positions. In FY 21, that was 410 FTE positions. Governor's recommendation for FY 22 is still 410 FTE positions. FY 23, the governor recommends 451.6 FTE positions, and that's related to providing staff for operationalizing the expansion projects there, which we'll go into detail about. Thanks. Thank you, sir. Looking on, I would refer everyone to page 11 is where we'll pick up on, and you'll see the table there. The agency does have quite a few enhancements to review, and we'll go through them. Turning to page 12, again, just conceptually, we'll go through the enhancements. You will see that there is one enhancement that is really both involves the central office and 2 of the correctional facilities. Then we'll go through enhancement requests for the central office, look at a few major shifts for the central office, and then go into the facilities. And then we'll do that same process when we talk about the governor's recommendation. So turning to page 12, the agencies request $517.3 million, including $480.4 million SGF for the entire KDOC system for FY 2023. This is an all funds increase of $30.7 million or 6.3%, including an SGF increase of $54.5 million above the FY 22 revised estimate. So the adjustments involved in that, and we'll go into those, you will see item 1 is an enhancement for Lansing Correctional Facility and Winfield Correctional Facility expansion projects operational expenditures. The agency requests a total of $20.2 million SGF to operate recently renovated 200-bed substance abuse treatment center at the Lansing Correctional Facility and a 241-bed assisted living unit and substance abuse treatment at the Winfield Correctional Facility. These expenditures include contracted medical staff, and program staff managed through the central office. Expenditures also support the addition of 89 FTE positions at Lansing and Winfield Correctional Facilities, which primarily include correctional officers, counselors, maintenance staff, as well as costs for utilities and equipment. And the agency yesterday did clarify with me there was an error in some of the entry of the budget request. That's actually a request that totals $10.6 million rather than $20.2 million. And I would refer you to page, sorry, I'm going to have you jump around a little bit here, but we're going to go to page 20. In those gray boxes, you'll see a more detailed breakdown of that request for the Lansing and Winfield expansion operational expenditures.
Somewhere help me just a little bit. So when I look at page 19, I see that it's 20.16 million.
So that on page 19, where you see those enhancements listed, rather than saying 20.2 million, that should actually read 10.6 million.
So then when we go to the more detailed breakdown,
Yep.
Why do those still add up to that 20 million?
So the difference
where's the other 10 million coming from?
So the on page 20, you'll see that first bullet point that it reads 11.5 million to the central office for contracted staff. That should actually read 1.9 million. Instead of 20, so the 20.2 is the total of those 4 bullet points. And of those 4, it's essentially, it was a data entry error. So rather than reading 11.5 million, it should have read 1.9 million, which brings the overall total down by that much.
Okay, so how are we going to handle it when we do the report out so that we're not increasing their spending by $10 million accidentally?
So you'll see when with the governor's recommendation, her recommendation is not the full amount. It is a lesser amount, even than that adjusted amount of 10.6 million. The governor's actually going to recommend 9.4 million.
Okay, so as long as we start with the governor's rec, we'll be okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So to clarify, the agency discussed the need for this assisted living unit and substance abuse unit, states that the prison population continues to age. The need for specialized housing is critical. Further, the need for substance abuse treatment has exceeded the agency's current capacity, with only about 48% of the inmates identified as in need of receiving such, only 48% receive such treatment. So to meet this need, the 2020 legislature appropriated funds to renovate those facilities. So those appropriations occurred a couple of years ago. The legislature identified these facilities as a need. What you're seeing now is requests for money to operate those facilities. So that includes, rather than the 11.5 million you're seeing here, it's actually 1.9 million for central office for contracted medical staff and operating expenses at substance abuse treatment centers in Lansing and Winfield. So these would include specialized staff, operating expenditures, expansions of existing contracts with substance abuse treatment for treatment providers. Item number 2 is 1.4 million for the central office to add 18.6 FTE medical positions to the agency's existing medical contracts. So these are not FTE positions within the agency, but they would be added to the medical contract for the throughout the system. You'll see bullet 3, it's 4.7 million. This is money that would go to the Winfield Correctional Facility to support 55 FTE positions. And those are not specialized medical or treatment staff, but are essentially correctional officers, maintenance staff, sort of the standard operational staff. And that would include utilities, items like clothing and office equipment. The 4th bullet is 2.6 million to the Lansing Correctional Facility to add 34 FTE positions to support a substance abuse treatment center. These positions again include unit team counselors, correctional officers, activity specialists, administrative support, maintenance staff. So that's kind of a breakdown of that larger request, and that request really involves 3 entities. It involves the central office, who manages those medical contracts, so the specialized staffs that are part of those contracts, and then it is funding that would go to the Lansing Correctional Facility and funding that would go to the Winfield Correctional Facility. And I can stand for some questions right now if anybody needs clarification.
Does anybody have any questions about these projects? I think all of us have been on this committee for a while, and we understand the importance of mental health and substance abuse treatment for the people in our corrections system. And I think we also understand they have an aging population that we have an obligation to care for. So, yeah.
All right, Mr. Chairman, moving on page 12. Item number 2 is central office enhancement to restore central office staffing. Agency requests 450,776 SGF to restore salaries and wages expenditures at the central office that were decreased by the 2021 legislature as part of a reduced resource item. If you'll remember, many agencies last year had to identify sort of a 10% cut because there was assumption that we were going to have critical budget issues. Today we stand with a surplus, so many of those agencies are requesting to restore that. It's often referred to as to restore their base budget, but it's to restore the funding for the central office. So this adjustment would sustain 6 FTE positions in areas such as fiscal management, human resources, and legal counsel. Item 3 is a central office enhancement for vehicles and equipment. The agency requests 817,000 SGF to partially support the scheduled replacement of 48 vehicles and safety and security equipment utilized by staff. So the agency maintains a fleet of somewhere above 500 vehicles. These are vehicles that are used at all 8 correctional facilities, at parole offices, at the central offices, and they have a plan to replace up to 10% of that fleet of vehicles each year. So they identify the 10% that has the highest mileage, or that has the most that is in the greatest need of replacement. These vehicles are typically used for items such as inmate transport between the facilities, maintenance vehicles at the facilities, even fire suppression services at the facilities. So they're used for a variety of purposes. Vehicles that would be replaced would include sedans, utility trucks, buses to transport inmates from facility to facility. Item number 4 is a central office enhancement for staff development specialists. The agency requests 1.1 million SGF to fund 12 FTE staff development specialist positions and purchase equipment to enable training in areas such as case management for unit team counselors, parole officers, community corrections, as well as information technology. This proposal is generated from a statewide workforce survey that was done and to include correctional staff, and many of them of the staff identified needs to receive training in areas beyond just correctional officer procedures or security processes. So this is an attempt to provide staff to help identify what are the training needs and who can facilitate that training. Item 5, central office enhancement for reentry programs. The agency requests 11.4 million SGF for a forensic nursing facility and job specialist position to support offenders during reentry to society. The contracted forensic nursing facility would provide care, including mental health beds, for offenders who are oftentimes not accepted at standard nursing homes. Job specialist positions would work with workforce centers and employers to place offenders departing in correctional facilities and find employment for those individuals. Item 6, central office enhancement, parole support. Agency requests 540,000 SGF to fund 3 vacant FTE positions and purchase 6 additional vehicles for parole officers. These positions would include a safety officer to conduct inspections at parole offices and 2 program providers. Item 7, central office enhancement, replace revenue from inmate phone charges. We talked about this briefly yesterday. This was a request in FY22, and you will see this request also in FY23. Agency is requesting $747 to essentially replace revenue that would be lost as the agency complies with the federal communications order to reduce their inmate phone charges to 14 cents per minute. You'll see item number 8, central office enhancement, eliminate ICS or Inmate Communication Services Commission. The agency requests $3.7 million to offset revenue lost from further reducing the charge from inmate phone calls to 7 cents per minute. Inmate communication services are administered by a contracted service provider, which pays a commission that's utilized for inmate programs. The commission, which is estimated at $3.7 million for FY 2023, would be eliminated if the further rate reductions were implemented. Item number 9, central office enhancement, eliminate the Kansas Correctional Industries or KCI fund transfer. Agency requests 3.1 million SGF to offset elimination of a transfer from the Kansas Correctional Industries Fund for operational expenditures. The fund draws revenue from the sale of inmate-produced goods and was intended to support education programs. The agency notes, however, the monies from this fund have been utilized for increased food service and medical expenditures in lieu of SGF in recent years. Item 10 is a central office enhancement for IT outreach staff. We saw this enhancement in FY22, and you'll see it again in FY23. The agency requests 224,000 SGF for contracted information technology staff to provide outreach to community corrections agencies regarding Athena 1. That is that recently implemented case management data system for offenders on parole and serving probation. Item 11 is a central office enhancement for housing program. We saw this request in FY22. It's essentially to continue expansion of community-based housing for offenders with special needs upon reentry to society. Item 12, central office enhancement related to community corrections and parole staffing. Agency requests $3.1 million for increased grant funding to local community corrections agencies and to fund 5 FTE positions in parole services, which the intent is to reduce caseloads for community-based service supervision of offenders. The request includes $2.8 million for community corrections agencies, which is equivalent to 40 FTE positions. Item 13 is a central office enhancement for a CIBF adjustment. Agency requests $3.9 million from the Correctional Institutions Building Fund to adjust the annual appropriation for the repair and rehabilitation of correctional facilities to a level that would account for a 2.5% inflation. The agency notes that the current appropriation of approximately $5 million has been fixed at that rate since 1997, while the cost of services and materials has expired. A little bit more detail on that. CIBF, the Correctional Institutions Building Fund, is the KDOC's primary source for providing maintenance of the correctional facilities. That's a fund that is, revenue to the fund is derived from gaming revenues. So each year, gaming revenues up to 50 million are deposited in a state gaming revenue fund. 10% of that, by statute, is transferred to the Correctional Institutions Building Fund. So if we think of that, that's essentially saying that 10% of the first 50 million is made available to the Department of Corrections for their maintenance. That's equivalent to approximately $5 million each year. It's been fixed at that rate in statute since 1997. The agency is essentially arguing that that amount, which was fixed, is not able to fluctuate with the cost of goods and services. So expenses to maintain facilities have increased, but the resources to do that for them have been fixed at $5 million per year. Item 14 is a central office enhancement, actionable intel unit. Agency requests 159,000 SGF to fund one FTE position and purchase equipment for implementation of an actionable intelligence unit to coordinate the compilation of data regarding emerging threats and criminal behavior within the correctional system. Item 15 is a central office enhancement for the Prisoner Review Board. Agency requests 243,000 SGF to fund 3 hearing officer positions and 1 administrative support position for the Prisoner Review Board. These positions would administer preliminary parole revocation hearings across the state and assist with youthful offender hearings and address open records requests. Item number 16, the agency is requesting for batterer intervention program services. Agency requests 705,000 SGF for the batterer intervention program services in the victim services program. Request includes BIP services for paroled offenders and offenders in correctional facilities, as well as providing notifications to victims. Item 17 is central office enhancement for assessment quality assurance. Agency requests 1.6 million SGF to contract with a consultant to conduct quality assurance evaluation of risk assessments conducted by staff with offender under community supervision. And when we say risk assessments, this is really a primary method for the correctional facility. Each offender that comes into the system, a risk assessment is conducted with this individual. And this helps the correctional facility determine the risk level that this individual may need, what sort of programming is required for this individual, what kind of educational services, or even a variety of services, how many resources are needed per this individual. It's a standard process of doing these risk assessments. So what they're asking for is a contracted individual to essentially provide quality assurance for the process that's implemented in conducting these risk assessments. Item 18, central office enhancement, restorative justice. Agency requests 157,000 to fund 1.5 FTE position as restorative justice specialist to provide victim impact classes among inmates. 19, the agency requests 250,000 SGF to increase the use of GPS services of offenders under community supervision. So that concludes the enhancements for the central office in FY 2023. So now we'll just review some general adjustments within their budget that they're requesting. Item 12 is to restore SGF for graduated sanctions grants. This request includes an increase of 10 million SGF offset by a decrease of the same amount from special revenue funds for graduated sanction grants provided to local community corrections agencies for the supervision of juvenile offenders. So this adjustment would restore SGF money that was decreased by the 2021 legislature as part of a reduced resource item. So a little bit of background on this. This was another item from last year when we were envisioning difficult budget circumstances, the governor recommended there's a special revenue fund that had a significant balance, the unspent balance of 10 million. So the governor recommended that for 1 year, rather than pay $10 million in SGF for these specific grants, they would use some of the unspent balance from this fund for a period of 1 year. And so you can see this measure in FY22 would reverse that back to primarily utilizing SGF rather than that special revenue fund, essentially to restore the funding stream that existed prior to the reduced resource item. It's not really sustainable with that special revenue fund because it only had an unspent balance because there had been a period of time in which that banked up. Could not sustain a volume of expenditures of $10 million from that special revenue fund. Moving on to item, moving on to item 21. Request Central Office General Fee Fund. The request includes decreased expenditures of $3.4 million from the general fee fund, primarily for technology services associated with that Athena 2 data system that occur in FY22 but do not occur in 23. We talked briefly about this data system in FY22. The agency is beginning the development of this data system in FY23. They will not have the same level of expenditures for that data system. Item 22, evidence-based juvenile programs. The request includes expenditures totaling $16.5 million from the evidence-based juvenile programs account, which is a decrease of $3 million below the FY22 revised estimate. These expenditures support evidence-based community programs for juvenile offenders. We talked about this yesterday. Item 23, here we get to the central office capital improvements. Request includes capital improvement expenditures of $12.2 million, all from special revenue funds. This is a decrease of $10.5 million, including $6.6 million SGF. That decrease is primarily due to the completion of those expansion projects in Lansing and Winfield. So those projects are completed in 22. So in 23, they no longer have those level of expenditures. The decrease is partially offset by the agency's enhancement request that we talked about earlier of $3.9 million from special revenue funds for capital improvements. 24, now we're getting down to some of the facilities enhancement requests. The facilities requested a shrinkage reduction, total of $4.6 million for shrinkage reduction, and this included Ellsworth Correctional Facility, El Dorado, Kansas Juvenile Correctional Complex, Lansing, Norton. Shrinkage reduction. This shrinkage reduction would allow those agencies to fill vacant positions. Item 25. We'll talk of the facilities capital improvement request includes no capital improvement expenditures for the correctional facilities for FY 2023, which is a decrease of $5.4 million below the revised estimate. This is very normal. Funds for the capital improvement projects are typically appropriated to the central office in the budget year, and then in the current year, those funds will be transferred to the facilities to address the needs identified by the facilities. Under item 26, you'll see all other expenditures, primarily includes adjustments related to special revenue funds for medical services. The request also includes 3,405 FTE positions for the KDOC system, which is an increase of 84 FTE positions above the FY22 revised number. Position increase is primarily at the Lansing and Winfield correctional facilities to support operations of recently renovated assisted living units and substance abuse treatment center. So I can move on to the governor's recommendation. Governor's recommendation on page 15, governor recommends $518.9 million, including $478.6 million SGF for the entire KDOC system in FY 2023. So an all funds increase of $1.5 million and an SGF decrease of $1.9 million from the agency's FY 2023 request. So looking at some of those adjustments, item 27, enhancement for the Lansing and Winfield expansion projects. Governor recommends a total of $9.6 million. You'll remember the adjusted number we talked about was, I believe it was 10.6 is what the agency requested. The governor is recommending $9.6 million SGF for operating expenditures related to substance abuse and assisted living units. This is a decrease of actually 1 million below the agency's request. This expenditure is financed with 5 million in new SGF monies and 4.6 million SGF reallocated from the KDOC central office, 2.4 million, and the facilities, 2.2 million. And in a bit, we'll get to where that's coming from. This recommendation includes 104 FTE positions, which is an increase of 15.1 FTE positions above the agency's request. Central office enhancements, equipment and vehicles. The governor recommends 3.8 million for replacement of vehicles and security and safety equipment, which is an increase of 3.1 million above the agency's request. Central office enhancement for community corrections and parole staff. The governor recommends 8.4 million exclusively for increased grant funding to local community corrections agencies for the purpose of increasing salaries. This is an increase of 5.3 million above the agency's request. Item 30, central office, non-recommended. So a lot of the enhancement requests did not get approved by the governor, so I've lumped them all together. The governor does not recommend enhancements for staff development specialists, re-entry programs, parole support, IT outreach staff, elimination of the ICS or Inmate Communication Services Commissions, CIBF adjustments, actionable intel unit, VIP services, assessment quality assurance, restorative justice, nor GPS monitoring. And probably what is a more useful visual way to look at this, if you look on page 19, you'll see that list of FY 2023 enhancements. On the left side of that table, you'll see what the agency was requesting. On the right side, you'll see what the governor is recommending. So you can see there are several items that the governor is not recommending.
So that's why
Yep, that where you see the first item there, the LCF, WCF, that should actually read 10.6 million rather than 20.2. And so you can see on the right side of that, the governor then recommends 9.6 million for that purpose. Okay, so then that addresses many of the enhancement requests. Then we get to some ideas or some items that emerged within the governor's recommendation. Item 31, 24/7 pay initiative. Governor recommends adding 34.3 million, including 33.9 million SGF for the FY 22 or FY 2023 to continue the 24/7 pay initiative recommended by the Spark Task Force and approved by the State Finance Council. Again, that plan includes temporary base pay increase as well as a temporary pay increase differentials for hourly personnel. So what's significant to note about that is we saw this 24/7 plan in FY 22. In FY 22, that's funded with COVID-19 federal relief funds or ARPA or American Rescue Plan Act funds. In FY 23, the governor is recommending that continue, but it would be paid for with state general funds rather than federal relief funds.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to track through some of these other changes. Which one are we on right now that you're talking about?
I'm looking at item 31 on page 15.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the 24/7 pay plan would apply to both fiscal years. In FY 22, that's paid for out of federal relief funds. In FY 23, that would be paid for out of state general funds. Item 32, central office reallocation. The governor recommends reallocating a total of 2.4 million SGF from the central office to partially support operating expenditures at the Lansing and Winfield expansion projects. So essentially, he's repurposing 2.4 million from the central office to apply to the expansion projects. Item 32, we get to adjustments for the correctional facilities. We see a shrinkage reduction. Agencies requested a shrinkage reduction. The governor does not recommend that shrinkage reduction. Item 34, facilities reallocation. Governor recommends reallocating a total of 2.2 million SGF from multiple adult correctional facilities to partially support operating expenditures at the Lansing and Winfield expansion projects. This reallocation is due to what's considered unit drawdowns resulting from a lower prison population projection.
Hey, Merle.
Yes, sir.
So why doesn't the 24/7 pay initiative show up on page 19? Or am I just missing it? I'm not.
It
Try
does
and
not
find-
show up on page 19 because it was not an enhancement requested by the agency. It was an expenditure introduced by the governor after the agency had submitted their
So
enhancement
is there any
request.
place that summarizes those and their effect on the budget?
So there
Where's
is
the
more.
page that does that?
There is more detail on the 24/7 pay initiative itself on page 29 that kind of explains the origin to it and what's involved, the pay increases and details on the differentials.
I think that's one of the reasons I struggle with this form sometimes. You know, there's not that one central place you can go to. Just for everybody's information, we've kind of changed the formatting of our budget analysis stuff. And so some of us, well, I struggle sometimes to find things that I thought I used to know where
Me
they
both,
were.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. You're just being too kind. You know, I'm old and losing my mind. Okay. So there's not a central place that shows where that 24/7 pay plan flows through the budget. Or is there one earlier? There's not a central sheet that shows where all of these enhancements affect the final ending balance.
I'm not sure if this is what you're asking, but the table on page 11 and 12 would reflect those adjustments. So, for example,
Gotcha. I
on
found it.
page 12, item 31, you would now see where there's $33.9 million added to that kind of running total.
Yeah, that was the one I was looking for. Thank you.
We were talking about the pay initiative and central office. We talked about the shrinkage reduction. So the final item is governor's recommendation includes 3,421.1 FTE positions, which is and I'm sorry, I'm looking on page 16, kind of the last paragraph there. The governor's recommendation also includes 3,420.1 FTE positions, which is an increase of 15.1 FTE positions above the agency's FY 2023 request. So that can be a little confusing. The agency asked for a certain number for Winfield and Lansing, and then the governor recommended more than they asked. She actually recommended 15 more than they asked. But that's a total of about 89 FTE positions between all the substance abuse treatment centers and the assisted living centers altogether. That's an addition of 89 FTE. And that primarily that's
Representative Hauser has a question. Oh, go ahead. We already stopped him now. I broke his train of thought.
this is a good stopping point, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer.
Well, you know, Merle, I'm looking here. Can you show me anything that's, we're just talking about the governor's recommended increases. And then let's say if you go back, I'm wanting to see like a net result here. We're taking out some of the recommendations, what the governor taking does not gonna do the recommendation. So is there something that shows us that how many $1 million the not going along with recommendations takes off the request, the agency request, and then how much does the governor add back on? There's something that shows me that.
I think this might be to what you're speaking to. So you can look on page 8 under governor's recommendation. Governor's recommending $534.9 million. You'll see that second sentence is this is an all funds increase. So altogether, this is an increase of $48.2 million. I'm looking under governor's recommendation, about midway down the page. There's about 2 sentences under that banner right there. The second sentence, I think, is gets to what you're looking for. So it's an all funds. Governor's recommending an increase of $48.2 million. Of that, 29.7 is SGF above the agency's FY22 revised estimate.
So is that 23 too? I mean,
I'm sorry. Sorry, I was actually looking on the wrong page. I would have you go to page 15 and you'll see, yep, and you'll see governor's recommendation, same sentence for the correct fiscal year that you're looking for.
Yeah, I think this is a good place to start to get some questions in. Representative Wagle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your report. Um, the one thing I wanted to ask you about when you're reading was on item number 3 on page 12, which talks about replacing 48 vehicles at a cost that the request was 870,000. But yet, when you go back to the recommendation of the enhancements, it went from 817,682 to 3,600,000 or 872, over $3 million more. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, so if you look on page 21, request number 18, titled Vehicles and Equipment, agency was requesting 817. That was only a part of the total expenditures that they were going to be making. So you can see the first bullet, 263,900 to supplement a total expenditure of 1.3 million for the purchase of 48 vehicles. So you are correct. They asked for a lesser amount. The governor is recommending a larger amount, and I believe partially that is to help. To support all of the purchase vehicles that they were planning, rather than them relying on some of the special revenue funds. These SGF funds would be used to support that. So the crux of your question is the governor is recommending more than the agency request.
Do we know? I know you talked about different vehicles. Some are used for transport. Some are used for probably moving material and maintenance around the facilities. Are any of those vehicles multi-purpose vehicles? I know that vans or buses that are used to transport, those have to be configured a certain way. But of those 48 vehicles or plus or whatever, are any of those multi-purpose vehicles that can be used for more than one, just maintenance, that they can be used for getting office supplies or moving personnel from one area to another?
Yeah, then the agency may have a better response to this, but it's my understanding those vehicles are often assigned to a facility, so they may be used for multiple purposes within that facility. But they typically have a primary function. This is a maintenance vehicle, probably can be used to support other functions. But but you are correct. I think some of the more key unique vehicles, the buses, I think those are primarily for transport purposes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Delberdane?
Thank you, Chair. I've got several questions here, but first one, page 12, item number 5. It's a contracted forensic nursing facility. So where you've got facility, is it a new building, or where is this thing, or what are we doing here?
So from the agency's request, this is sort of a concept at this point. So they're requesting these funds. They would issue an RFP to identify a vendor that could provide a facility like this. So the idea is not to build a new structure, but is to contract for this type of forensic nursing care facility.
You turn for me on it. But okay, then number 9, page 13, is that just basically repaying monies back? To
yeah. So what that would mean is
industries.
No, what that means is 3.9 million in expenditures. So there's different things that they pay for at up to 3.9 million. Rather than using money from the KCI fund, they would use SGF money for those expenditures, which would then allow KCI to use those funds to invest in their education programs. So it's using SGF to offset what the KCI fund would usually be used for. allowing the KCI fund to be used for educational programs.
So the monies have been utilized for food services then is what it's saying.
Right. So rather than using expenditures from the KCI fund, SGF would be used to cover the costs for those food services.
Okay.
So it's a large food service contract. A portion of that, essentially some of the portions that have increased in recent years, they've used that KCI fund to pay the increased amount. So now it would just be sort of purely SGF.
Right. Okay. And then
But the governor did not recommend that. You knew that.
okay.
Okay.
Okay. Then under the governor's recommendations, number 27 on page 15, there's just a lot going on here. So the governor recommends a total of 9.6 million SGF, but it's a decrease of 10.5 million below the request. And then it gives a breakdown of how they're funding it, but it's also an increase of 15 FTEs. So we're reducing it $10 million and adding 15 FTEs is the way I'm reading this thing.
Yeah. So you're reducing it 10 million, which actually because of the number correction there that we talked about earlier, that's she's recommending 9.6 million, which is 1 million less than the agency request.
Okay.
So it's still essentially 9.6 in new expenditures for the whole system, but it's a decrease from what the
That's what I was
agency
missing.
requested.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On item number 31, the 24/7 pay initiative. Oh, I'm sorry. This is on page 15. I'm sorry. Is that so? The new pay initiative that's still temporary, or just make it permanent?
Yeah. So it's my understanding. It's not clear, and the governor's recommendation still continues to reference it as a temporary pay increase, although it does use SGF in FY 2023. So it's difficult for me to tell whether the intent is for that to cease after FY 2023 or to continue with SGF funding.
That's why I asked, because I didn't know either. Can ARP money be used to purchase the vehicles instead of coming out of SGF? And then if it doesn't, then we could pay for it at SGF?
So I'd have to investigate further, but there are other instances where I think, at least in other states, where ARPA funds, those discretionary funds, have been used for sort of capital projects such as vehicles.
You may not be able to answer this question, but the governor on page 16 makes reference to the governor's recommendation for 15 additional employees, full-time employees. I'm sure that maybe the secretary will have to answer this question. You know what they're for?
So those 15, the governor recommends those 15. Those are for correctional officer positions at the Lansing and Winfield correctional facilities. These are people that are staffing those expansion projects. So maintenance people, correctional officers, counselors at the substance abuse treatment centers and the assisted living.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions at this time? Okay. Oh, Representative Weigel.
One more quick one on page 13, number 14, item number 14, actionable intelligence unit. There isn't one now. They don't.
There is not, and the agency would probably have more details on this. I think each facility has what they consider investigative officers. So these are standard in correctional facilities. They are people that can investigate criminal behavior. This would be an individual to sort of coordinate those efforts and to compile that information, not just into standard investigation about maybe abuse, but to compile that and use that as intelligence information.
Well, is that because this is a new unit and they're funding it with one full-time employment position? Is that position going to be dedicated just to that? I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, that person is not going to be just a corrections officer.
That is correct, Representative. It's my understanding that person would be primarily an intelligence, primarily relate to compiling intelligence. And so they would coordinate the efforts of some of the investigative officers at each of the correctional facilities. So they are sort of a centralized individual who.
So they're not going to be working within the complex or moving from complex. They're going to be like centralized, and they're going to get the information in there and then work through it from there. Is that what you're saying?
That is my understanding.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And again, maybe you're aware the governor did not recommend that item also. Okay. Any other questions at this time? Okay. If not, we're going to continue on. What do you have now?
Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing. Always forget the item at the back. If we go back to page 71, capital improvements, we talked a little bit about FY22 yesterday. I just wanted to hit on FY23. So you can see that the table breaks down some of the expenditures, what the agency has requested, what the governor is recommending. If you go to page 73, capital improvements, the agency requests $12.2 million, all special revenue funds for capital improvement expenditures throughout the KDOC system. That's a decrease of $12 million, essentially because those Lansing and Winfield projects completed in FY22, so those expenditures are not needed in FY23. The decrease is partially offset by the agency's enhancement request of $3.9 million CIBF to adjust the annual appropriations from the fund to a level that would account for inflation. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but I just wanted to touch on that within the capital improvements. And I would note that this capital improvement budget was heard in the Joint Committee on State Building Construction just today. That committee accepted that report. They did add a notation that the Senate Ways and Means Committee and House Appropriations Committee further examine this issue of the appropriation from the Correctional Institutions Building Fund. There is a statute that sort of governs that only 10% of the first 50 million can go to this fund. So there may be some further study of whether there's a need to adjust that statute.
So say that again. They wanted us to look into what portion of it? They wanted us to look into increasing the amount that they receive from the EDIF to see if there was a need for it?
That's essentially that's correct. The Joint Building Committee recommended that Senate Ways and Means and House Appropriations further look into
adjusting the
CIB,
transfer.
the Correctional Institutions Building Fund.
Okay. So in conjunction with that, can you kind of get me history of the inflows and outflows into that fund and the uses that they were, and then we can have the agency weigh in on that also?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right.
That's all I have, sir.
Okay, thank you, Merle. All right, did Chuck Knapp leave? He's next on the agenda. Maybe we got him done early so that they could get out of here. All right, next on the agenda is Randy Regier with the Kansas Community Corrections Association. Randy, welcome to the committee. I think we've seen you before, haven't we?
Yes, sir. We'll bring up a PowerPoint for us today.
Just while Randy's doing that, we do have written testimony by Chuck Knapp in our folder regarding the importance of the JAG program. We also have written testimony for further down the list from Trish Giordano. She's commissioner with the Gary County Board of County Commissions. I'm sure that's about community corrections. And also testimony from Rachel Marsh with the Children's Alliance of Kansas, and Sarah LaFrenz, the president of the Kansas Organization of State Employees. So go ahead, Randy.
Good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. Again, my name is Randy Regier. I'm the director of Reno County Community Corrections and the president of the Kansas Community Corrections Association. Our association is made up of the 31 adult and juvenile community corrections agencies across the state. Just as a quick reminder, I wanted to touch on the different field supervision agencies we have here in Kansas. Court Services is under the Office of Judicial Administration. Their staff are state employees and they supervise misdemeanor and low-risk felony probation. State parole is part of the Department of Corrections. Parole staff are also state employees and they supervise people after they're released from prison. Community Corrections is funded by grants from the Department of Corrections to local counties. Community Corrections staff are county employees and they supervise moderate and high-risk felony offenders. A primary focus of Community Corrections is to save the state money by diverting people from high-cost prison beds. Officers work to move offenders from being a drain on social services to being tax-paying, productive members of the community. Our goal is to provide public safety by addressing the needs of high-risk felony offenders while they're in the community. Promoting public safety starts by officers assessing offenders' high-risk crime-causing factors. Officers address these factors by teaching new skills, ways of thinking, and new behaviors. Officers assist offenders by making referrals to specialized services such as substance abuse, mental health, and domestic violence treatment programs. They also assist with housing, employment, financial instability. Officers work with offenders' families, support people, law enforcement, social services, as well as crime victims to ensure public safety. Community corrections can be viewed as a cost avoidance mechanism. Many of the offenders we supervise are presumptive prison according to sentencing guidelines. This means without a departure from the sentencing guidelines, the judge should be ordering the person directly to prison. Out of the cases assigned to community corrections in FY21, 28% were presumptive prison statewide. 5 out of the 31 community corrections agencies had more than 40% of their assigned adult offenders receiving departures from presumptive prison sentences. In FY20, 25% of the cases closed statewide were presumptive prison, and 69% of these people did not go to prison. This is 1,054 offenders who should have been sentenced directly to prison, who we successfully diverted from filling a prison bed. Community corrections creates a significant cost avoidance to the state with these presumptive prison cases alone. The statewide success rate for FY20 was 73%, looking at our total population. This is a total of 4,373 offenders who were diverted from a prison facility. This is a very high success rate if you consider the high-risk population we supervise. For fiscal year 22, the legislature appropriated $10.8 million for judicial branch pay increases and $4.3 million for 70 additional court services officer positions. Recently, Governor Kelly's executive order gave much needed raises to state parole, and the additional raises for parole have been included in her recommended FY23 budget. However, neither of these funding increases included community corrections. After 8 years of flat funding, we are encouraged and very thankful to see Governor Kelly's recommendation for an $8.4 million increase for fiscal year 23. This is a positive step in the right direction for restoring agencies. Community corrections has standards set by statute. These requirements are set out what is needed and expected to provide intensive supervision in the community. It is nearly impossible for agencies to meet these minimum requirements and keep communities safe with continued flat funding. For the past several years, community corrections agencies have had to choose between losing staff because they're paying low wages or reducing the number of officers so they can pay a competitive rate. This isn't a sustainable plan. Not only are agencies losing their trained, experienced staff, but there are several community corrections directors across the state making less than a level 1 court service officer. Agencies have been forced to offer fewer programs to change offender behavior and have fewer resources to assist offenders in making changes. Officers have less time to focus on evidence-based behavior change strategies. The result of all this is increased likelihood offenders will engage in illegal activity, resulting in additional crime victims and revocation to prison. The KCCA evaluated the community corrections agencies across the state and calculated how much additional funding would be needed to bring adult and juvenile staff up to the Office of Judicial Administration pay scale. We also evaluated caseload populations and determined 50 additional adult officers are needed statewide. This work was all done in close partnership with the Department of Corrections. In the end, we determined a total current need to bring staff up to the OJA pay scale is $14.3 million. It's important to understand this amount does not address the many other positions lost due to flat and reduced funding. Over the years in Reno County alone, we've had to cut a full-time surveillance officer, a full-time program provider, a full-time secretary, and 2 full-time licensed addictions counselors. The $14.3 million does not address restoring any of these positions, which have a significant impact on changing offender behavior and community safety. It's essential for public safety to fund community corrections agencies to pay a competitive wage. It's critical agencies have enough staff to effectively supervise and assist this very difficult population. Governor Kelly's recommended increase of $8.4 million moves us closer to providing a competitive pay rate, but does not meet the need of community corrections agencies in your communities. To keep our communities safe, we need continued support to fully fund agencies, not just a one-time increase. Agencies greatly appreciate the governor's support and this initial investment. Fully funding agencies helps them safely supervise this population in the community and to avoid high cost of incarceration. Thank you, Chairman and committee members, for your time. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Do we have any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is Aaron Geis, Director of the Northwest Kansas Community Corrections. Welcome to the committee, Aaron.
Good afternoon, Chairman Francis and members of the committee. My name's Aaron Geist. I'm the Director of Northwest Kansas Community Corrections. I come here today in support of the Kansas Community Corrections Association's request for additional funding. Also to ensure that this committee is aware of the challenges that we face with limited funding in the most rural part of Kansas. There are a few things that make our office unique. First of all, our office covers 17 counties in the northwest corner of Kansas. We make up 3 judicial districts, the 15th, the 17th, and the 23rd. We cover a total of 16,194 square miles. These 17 counties are rural communities that have little to no treatment options or other resources. In addition to our large geographical area, our office is also the only community corrections office in the state that contracts with the Kansas Department of Corrections to provide parole and post-release services. Our parole and post-release clients make up approximately 1/3 of our client population. As you can imagine, there are several challenges that come with supervising 17 counties. Travel time and expenses are 2 of those. As an agency, we do our best to meet our clients where they're at, as many of them do not have adequate transportation or the funds available to drive 1 to 2 hours to one of our office locations. This requires a significant amount of travel time, especially for our ISOs who supervise the 17th and 15th judicial districts. For example, we have 1 intensive supervision officer that covers the entire 17th judicial district. This is made up of 6 counties. His office is based out of Norton. With contact standards for community corrections and parole, he may be required to make up to 150 contacts in 1 month. Now, this wouldn't be a problem if all those clients were coming to his office in Norton to be seen. But as I said before, we do our best to meet our clients where they're at. Because of this, approximately 85% of his monthly contacts are done in the field. Field contacts could include a home visit, an employment visit, a visit at a treatment center, or other local community options. In FY21, our 3 intensive supervision officers that cover the 15th and 17th judicial districts accounted for 69% of our total agency mileage. And in FY22, our office budgeted $24,000 in fuel and vehicle maintenance alone. Our limited budget also presents a challenge. With the funds we receive through the parole contract and our community corrections budget, which is funded through the Kansas Department of Corrections, this is barely enough to cover our salary and benefits for our 11 staff members, as well as basic agency operations. Limited funding in rural communities also present numerous employment difficulties, not just for our clients, but for us as an agency. It is difficult for us to find qualified applicants, especially in the 15th and 17th judicial districts. In fact, we are lucky to get 1 or 2 qualified applicants, if any, when advertising for positions in these areas. We must be able to compete and compensate our employees appropriately. With the recent adjustments to the OJA pay scale, a new CSO starts off at $23.13 an hour. I have an ISO who's been employed with our office for 12 years who still does not make $23.13 an hour. We currently just do not have the funds available to compete. Without additional funding, I fear that we will continue to lose valuable community corrections employees. Our options are limited. The governor's funding recommendation, or the amount that the Kansas Community Corrections Association is recommending, will help our programs and better protect our community. Thank you for your time, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you for being here. Bear with me because it's late in the day, so I'm missing something. I realize this was previous speaker who was Kansas Community Corrections. And we talked about a 2.6 million increase in 22 and 8.4 million increase in 23. And here you are from what looks like the same agency coming to secure additional funding. What am I missing? Because we're broke now.
I'm also with Community Corrections.
Okay. So did we get 8 million additional, or are we about to go bankrupt here according to your statement, it sounds like?
The $8.4 million is part of the governor's recommended increase for FY23.
Right.
So the concern is that the 8.4 does not meet our need across the state. What we have is we have grants that come from the Department of Corrections to the counties for both juvenile and adult programming. And we don't believe that the $8.4 million will meet the need for those agencies to meet that, to provide a competitive pay rate.
Other questions? Great job. Thanks for coming all the way from Northwest Kansas. Where are you out of?
I'm based out of Hayes.
Okay. Well, maybe that's not quite as far as Liberal, but I understand the travel, and you've got a good 4-lane to get here.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Now that we have those out of the way, we'll have our presentation by Secretary Zamuda. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Bradshaw will represent us.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Keith Bradshaw. I'm Executive Director of Contracts and Finance for the Department of Corrections. I'm going to briefly go through the highlights of the governor's recommendation, answer any questions the committee may have. So before starting on that, let's do a quick comparison of the FY22 and 23 governor's recommendations to the FY21 approved budget and breaking down that by expenditure type. So as you can see, salaries and wages still accounts for the large share of our budget at over 40% of the total agency budget. And that growth you're seeing there is related to the base pay increases that are passed in November, as well as the differentials that was approved in December. That's about $8.3 million from the American Recovery Plan Act fund. The total increase from 01 to 22 is about $14.9 million. We had some savings and some unit closures due to the decreased population, which I'll address here in a little bit. In FY23, full funding is provided for the pay plan and for the temporary differentials, which brought that up another to $33.9 million. Healthcare still counts as our second largest share of our budget and accounts for roughly 17% of our budget. The contract includes a 2.6% annual escalator in that contract, and that's been tempered a little bit with the decline in the population. So we do recoup some savings as a result of that population being down from where it was when we first bid that and awarded it in 2020. Aid to local and other assistance is our third largest category, accounts for about 14 to 15% of our budget. And these are all the grants that go out to community corrections for both adult and juvenile supervision, as well as grants from the Evidence-Based Programs Fund for juveniles and out-of-home placements for juvenile offenders who are supervised in the community, as well as some other pass-through grants from federal awards and other miscellaneous grants to the communities. So the rest of those categories, those first three account for about 3/4 of our budget. The rest accounts for about 25%, includes everything under other operating expenditures, such as payments to the counties for housing parole violators until return to one of our facilities, contracts for reentry and offender programs, our software licensing, staff travel, and so forth, as well as our food service, facility rent, parole office rent, and the lease for the Lansing facility. I'll briefly touch on the employee compensation plan. We discussed this here a few weeks ago. The secretary testified to this, and we heard a little bit from Merle on that. So in the governor's recommendation for FY23, she's proposing $8.7 million in FY23 from the state general fund to fully fund the base pay increases that are approved in November. And then another $25.2 million from the state general fund to continue the temporary differentials through fiscal year 23. Not included in our numbers, but part of the larger governor's budget recommendation is 5% across the board increase for all state employees and both are in all three branches of government, as well as shifting those employees are currently under the Corrections Capers retirement plan, as well as their juvenile counterparts at the Kansas Juvenile Correctional Complex over to Kansas Police and Fire. And that would be effective on July 1st.
Keith,
Yes.
There's not an amount in your budget for that transfer from Capers to KPNF, is there? You're thinking that it'd be handled in omnibus?
They've not worked the fiscal note on that yet. I don't think the bill's been introduced for this yet.
Okay, thank you.
Regarding the base pay plan increase back in November. So with our newly hired corrections officers, the base pay, starting pay did not increase. That remains at $18.26 an hour. But rather than having a 1-year waiting period before that new hire would bump up in pay, the governor's plan increases pay at the 3-month mark and at the 9-month mark to try and incentivize individuals to, once they come on board with us, to stay with us for that first year and increase the likelihood they'll stay with us long term. So at the end of the day, all of our employees who have been with us at least 3 months, and amongst the uniform staff, received some sort of a pay increase, and that ranged anywhere from 2.5% to 11%, depending on where they were on the pay scale at the time of the increase. For our unit team counselors and supervisors and managers, as well as parole officers, base pay was increased as well in the November pay plan. For entry-level parole officers and counselors, that went up from $18.26 an hour to $22.16 per hour.
Keith, I hate to keep interrupting you, but I know I've got short-term memory loss and I won't remember to ask my question. So did this alleviate a lot of the compression issues we heard about when we had our testimony? This base pay increase for unit team and parole officers?
I don't think it addressed all the compression issues. It did address some of them. Because we were not looking at a flat increase for all individuals in that particular classification, say 5% or 10%. It was all based on a movement on the pay matrix, based on increasing the pay grade and then increasing the step. The amount of increase varied across the board. So you almost have to look on a case-by-case basis to see what an individual's increase would have been as a result of this.
Yeah, and I hate to ask too many questions, but let's say, for instance, I was at a 28 pay grade, step 9, and I went from, let's see, I'm not sure what the percentage was. Would I have stayed on the same step as my pay grade increased?
Depending on where the individual, which step that individual was at. In most of these adjustments, if I recall, they moved them from, I believe, step 6 to step 8. So someone who was already on step 8 or higher stayed on that step, and they just got the pay grade bump. Someone who was below that step, the new hiring step, or the new step for that classification, if they're on, say, step 6, they got the pay grade increase and then movement on the chart over to step 8. So that's where
that's where the compression comes in. So we probably increased the compression issue rather than
Without studying the numbers, I couldn't say definitively that they made it worse or made it better. It again really comes down to a case by case examination of each position and see where they're at relative where they would have been several years ago had we kept everything in sync.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Again, briefly on the pay differentials, these went into effect in December. Three of these four different differentials apply to our staff. Anyone who works in one of our correctional facilities as an hourly employee received the $1.50 an hour shift differential number one. Uniform staff and U-team staff also receive a $2 an hour differential on top of that. And then for any facility that has a vacancy rate of 25% or more, gets another differential of $2.50 per hour. So in some cases, individuals can be getting paid an additional $8.50 per hour if they qualify for all three of those. And then for our salaried staff, since they would not qualify for the differentials, they received a one-time bonus of $3,500 in lieu of that differential. It's really early, and since we've implemented the pay plan, so we've got some preliminary results. It's looking somewhat positive here. So this chart here shows the vacancy rate, weekly vacancy rate for all 9 correctional facilities amongst the uniform staff. And you can see that's a pretty steady increase throughout the fiscal year, going back to July. Towards the end of the chart, when we get into January, we do begin to see that to taper, level off a little bit. We have 2,019 authorized uniform positions statewide. As of last Monday on the 31st, we had 527 openings, and that's about 26% vacancy rate. And that's down a little bit from where we were on January 18th, where we had 541 vacancies. And to kind of put this in context, how this was climbing steadily, when the pay plan was approved on November 28th, we had 480 vacancies. Those pay increases did not hit checks until December 24th. December 26th is when the differentials went into effect. Those started hitting paychecks on January 21st, and we had 511 vacancies then. So we are starting to see that come down a little bit. Hopefully we've hit that peak. And as we get more time with the pay plan, we'll start to see that trend line go back down.
When was the pay plan initiated?
The base pay increases went into effect on November 26th, and then the shift differentials on December 26th.
So you started to see quite an increase even from July then. Is that correct?
Correct.
It could have almost been, and a part of the effect could have been COVID related.
Correct. Part of it's COVID, part of it's just the economy and the job market.
Right. Okay.
On the parole side, we're not quite seeing the same kind of impact yet, but then again, we're talking a lot smaller numbers that we're dealing with here. Between parole officer 1, parole officer 2, and parole supervisor classifications, we have 124 authorized positions. On January 31st, 18 of those were vacant for a vacancy rate of around 14.5%. We've had 4 new vacancies that have occurred between January 18th and the 31st. Because of the small numbers, it looks like it's a lot worse on this chart here. But the end story here is that it's still a little bit early for the parole. We're kind of treading water right now. What we're hearing and seeing is that we may hire a new person and then have 2 leave. The next week we hire 2 or 3 more people, and then 1 or 2 leave. So we're really kind of treading water at this point here. But again, we're really early in the pay plan, since that really didn't start hitting people's checks until December. We're still early on to start making some assumptions about how this is really going to play out over the next several months. I won't spend too much time on the community corrections pay plan. I think we've already talked about that quite a bit here today, but just briefly to summarize where we're at today. Back in October, the Community Corrections Association testified before the Joint Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice regarding their pay plan that Randy shared with you here just recently, for $14.3 million for pay increases and additional staff. The governor put in the budget a reduced amount that focuses solely on providing increases for those supervision officers of $2.6 million in this fiscal year to get the pay plan implemented and get it off the ground towards the end of this fiscal year, and then $8.4 million in the new fiscal year for to sustain those increases.
So, Keith, your original recommendation from the agency was not for 8.4. It was what, 3.8 million? Was that what it was, or?
We did not have a specific enhancement request in the budget for this. This was based off a testimony that was provided back in October by the Community Corrections Association, and that's the baseline from which I believe the governor's office and Division of the Budget worked off of to.
Oh, I thought you guys had an initial enhancement request. I mean, and it was a pretty large increase.
There's additional staffing.
Additional staffing for your central office, was that? Or additional staffing? I know you're with Community Corrections. Do you want to come forward real quick and introduce yourself? I thought Keith knew all the numbers, but obviously he's slipping in his old age. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hope Cooper, Deputy Secretary of Adult and Juvenile Community-Based Services. So for community corrections in the enhancement budget is the remainder of that 14.3 for additional staff. So the increase in pay is what is in the governor's recommended budget.
So you did not recommend the increase in pay in your budget. Merle, do you know what their original recommendations were for 2022 and 2023?
If you look on page 13, there was an enhancement request for community corrections and parole staffing. Agency requested 3.1 million SGF for increased grant funding to local community corrections to fund 5 FTE positions in parole services. So that additional money in grant funding was intended to allow community corrections agencies to add an equivalent of 40 FTE positions. So the agency's request was not for salary increase purposes, but was to allow increased grant funding to allow community corrections agencies to hire staff. Does that make sense?
What page did you say it was on?
Looking on page 13, page 12. I'm sorry, not page 12, page 13, item 12.
So the 5 FTE positions were for parole services, not for community corrections.
Right, so there's 2 parts to that. One part was for 5 FTE positions in parole services. And then the majority of that request was 2.8 million for community corrections agencies to hire 40 additional staff.
Okay.
Governor's response to that was not to hire additional staff, was to provide significantly more money to provide pay increases for those community corrections agencies.
So when we're talking about this, the governor's recommendation is it 8.4 million? Yeah, that's what's up there. And the 2.6 million, is that to go to the community corrections agencies also? Okay, so which agencies are getting these grants? Is it only community corrections, or is it also the juvenile justice agencies? I've heard 2 or 3 things.
For both juvenile and adult community corrections agencies, there's some that are joint operations. Same office supervises both populations. Some are separate organizations, but it is for both adult and juvenile supervision agencies.
And what is the total amount of our block grant funding for those agencies currently? The 2 of them together?
I have a slide in the deck here in a little bit. It's right around 44.3 million right now, and it'll go up to 50 million or roughly. But
you do have a slide in the deck later?
Yes.
Okay, I thought you were going to just pass on this one right now. Okay. 44.3 million grant funding. All right, I'll quit interrupting you for a while.
It's the same slide we just saw from Randy, so I won't spend much time on that regarding how supervision is done in the community in the state of Kansas. And then the funding, of course, the way funding is allocated is set in statute. We look at several criteria such as comprehensive plans, success rates, vacancy rates, and caseloads in determining those allocations. And here's the chart. And it looks like you got my ugly mug on there too, so you really can't see it that well. Is there a way we can fix that? Thank you. So with the governor's recommendation for 23, funding for community corrections agencies that says adult and juvenile would be $50.6 million. Going back to 2014, funding for community corrections with $41.7 million. Had an increase in 2015 due to the Justice Reinvestment Initiative. And then following in 2017, as part of the statewide allotments that were implemented due to revenues not meeting estimates, there was a reduction in grants there. From there, it stayed around the 42.9 million mark until recently when receipts to the Community Corrections Supervision Fund for DUI services in the community had declined, so we had to cut back on those expenditures there. Operating grants remained relatively flat at that point. And then with the 22 recommendation from the governor, funding will go up from $42.3 million to the $44.8 million figure, and then up to 50.6. Moving on, security equipment was also included in the governor's recommendation. So KDOC historically has not had dedicated funding appropriate for the replacement of security equipment. Over the years, it's come down to whenever a facility has some year-end savings that they're projecting because of various reasons, budgetary savings they have, they're able to go ahead and replace some equipment on an as-needed basis. Well, the result is a pretty disjointed process, not really a process at all. It's which a facility happened to have some leftover money, they took care of their needs. If a facility didn't have that advantage, they did without. And we really only replace equipment when it became an absolute critical issue or whenever we can scrape up the funds to do so. Starting in FY20, we received the $344,000 to start replacing some of our old stab vests throughout the system. And then in 2021, 2021, we received another $927,000 to start working on some of this other equipment, continued replacement stab vest, new ballistic helmets, weapons, gas masks, and those type of metal detectors, those type of items. The governor's recommendation for FY22 and 23 includes $1.4 million annually to continue to work on getting that backlog taken care of, start standardizing our equipment. So, for example, we have a variety of different types of helmets. Some facilities have nothing but riot helmets. Some may have ballistic helmets. Some have a mix of both. During this process, we're going to try to start that transition, so we're standardizing across the entire system, so everyone's using the same piece of gear. We have interoperability, and then we're also able to get a little better purchasing power when we're placing an annual order for the same type of gear for all of our facilities. And so once we get the backlog addressed, then we'll be able to get to a regular replacement schedule where every year we're replacing a certain percentage of each item on a regular basis. So we're not waiting until a radio breaks to decide we're going to replace it. It's getting cycled out when it starts meeting its end of its useful life, and we get a new radio out there in the hands of the staff.
So what's your funding? Are you going to talk about that in a minute? How many do you want to replace annually?
Yeah, I got a pretty big spreadsheet I can share with you afterwards if you like. It depends on the item, how much. Radio is the one that sticks in my head right now. The plan is 17% of our radios every year would be replaced. Again, it comes down to the individual item and how frequently they need to be replaced and when the anticipated expiration of that item or when it would reach its end of useful life.
Yeah, if you could give me that spreadsheet. You never know what I'm going to get asked in approps, right?
Along the same lines of equipment as our vehicles, again, we do not historically have not received funding for the purpose of replacing vehicles until here recently. We have a fleet of approximately 545 cars and light trucks. And this includes vans for inmate work crews. Starting in 2020, we received $241,000 to start working on some of this backlog. Again, in the past, it's when a vehicle breaks down and it costs more money to fix it than it is to replace it is when we might replace that vehicle. Sometimes we don't. It depends on the funds are available. And almost always we would go to federal surplus to get a replacement vehicle or the highway patrol and get a used vehicle from them. With the new funding we've been able to receive in the past couple of years, we've been able to start working on this backlog of vehicles that need to be replaced. Between FY20 and 21 funding, we've been able to replace 73 of our vehicles with new vehicles off state contract that have a warranty on them still, get a little more life out of them. And with the additional 2.5 million that the governor's recommending for FY23, we should be able to replace about 103 more vehicles. And so by the end of FY23, we'll have replaced about 30% of our fleet. Going into 24, there's probably about another 50 or so vehicles that would need to be replaced. And then at that point, we would have replaced around 40% of our fleet. And those vehicles would be 6 years old or less at that point. And then going into 25, we can get onto a regular replacement schedule of 25 to 30 vehicles annually to keep on that, so we don't end up with a backlog like we've had today.
Keith, and I think Representative Resman brought this to my attention. Do you guys have some ARPA or Spark requests out there? You know, there's some thought that at least maybe some of these vehicle replacements or other things, Spark money might be able to be used.
On the vehicles, I would have to research it. My initial reaction is we probably would not be able to unless it's related to response to the pandemic. So there might be some that are used for transports. We can make the argument that we're using that vehicle because we need to move a positive case from one facility to another one for isolation. Purchases like that might qualify, but I think for general use, for like general maintenance and parole staff use and so forth, I'm not sure those would qualify for that. We do have some items that we put on a list for consideration. They're all one-time capital projects, and that includes replacement of some of our antiquated facilities that had been built back in the 1800s, early 1900s. The construction of some new work release centers for the juvenile and female population, and career campuses as well, to provide more educational opportunities to the population.
But did you get upgraded or updated on that recent, the Spark process with the 4 subcommittees? I think they've eased up on some of those regulations quite a bit in this new round. I know that old round, it was pretty restrictive. You really had to have that tie. I think the end of the application process is like the 16th. I mean, we're really running out of time, but I know you do your due diligence, but I do think they've lessened up on some of the relationships where you have to tie it so closely to that.
I'm not too familiar with that. I know with the pay plan, we're having to make some of those connections as well, and with the response to the pandemic, and that's how we're able to justify the pay plan being tied back to the ARPA funds. The governor's recommendation also included about $6.7 million for the Pathways to Success initiative, and this will allow us to acquire some educational materials and equipment to help expand educational opportunities throughout the adult population. Included in this would be Wi-Fi installation at all of our sites, and provision of tablets for the population to access GED courses, college courses, virtual instructors online to be able to do their studies and their homework back in the living unit. And once that's fully operational, we would be able to have up to 1,000 residents at any given time on that network accessing their educational materials. This also includes virtual welders. Y'all probably very well familiar with our facilities and how we're really tight on space. We don't have much in the way of programming space, and a full welding shop does take quite a bit of resource and space, not just the space involved with getting it set up, but also the procurement of the steel and the gas in order to do that work. With the virtual welders, we can do it in a much smaller space. We have this already at KJCC for the juvenile population through Washburn Tech, and it's been very successful there. So this will open up more opportunities for the adult population to get this training in a field that's expected to grow by about 4.4% in Kansas over the next 6 years. And we'll also be able to acquire some CDL simulators. Again, same concept, the virtual welders. We wouldn't have to worry about the maintenance and fuel costs involved with owning a tractor trailer, nor the security issues that come with having to take a resident off-site to actually get the drive time in. We'll be able to use these CDL simulators in-house within the secure perimeter of the facility, open that up to more individuals to learn that skill and address another job field that's looking to grow probably about 2.3% over the next several years here. And this may be another option for when we're talking about ARPA money. This one may fit well within that concept there. It's a one-time expense and it helps address job creation.
You know, if you can get a request in for it, we want to make notion on our report out to appropriations that you're going to apply for it so that we can be a supporting entity for the funding on that. You know, give you a little bit like a letter of support.
Thank you. Briefly hit on the Winfield Lansing expansions. Again, funds were appropriated in FY21 and 22 to get these projects going. We've recently awarded contracts for both projects with the anticipation that work will be starting here sometime this spring, early summer, with the goal of having these units ready to be occupied in the fall. Again, the Winfield project is for 240 beds, 241 beds for nursing care and substance abuse programming. And then the Lansing project was 200 substance abuse programming beds. The governor's recommendation included $9.6 million for the operation of these units. So as Merle explained earlier, part of this is an addition of new funds to the base budget of $5 million, with another $4.6 million being reallocated from existing resources. And that's coming from funds previously allocated for contract beds, which we no longer need at this point, as well as some savings resulting from unit closures at some of our sites due to the lower population. And so these funds will be used for security staff, programming and counseling staff, as well as some non-uniform support staff, such as maintenance. It does include funding for 18.6 FTE on the medical contract for Winfield, for the nursing home, and then contract staff for the substance abuse programming that will be done at both those sites. And then to touch on a little bit about the loss of revenue to our inmate benefit fund. So the IBF is where our receipts from phone commissions, video visitation, commissary commissions and so forth is deposited, and then we use that to support many of our offender programs such as education and substance abuse programming and sex offender treatment. Our largest revenue source for this fund is from the phone commissions, and in July the FCC issued an order that went into effect this past October that mandated that the rates charged by these phone services be dropped down to 14 cents per minute. And so with that rate reduction, that has an impact of about $748,000 annually on IBF receipts. So the governor's including SGF to offset that loss of funds. The governor's recommendation also included $21.1 million being restored to the evidence-based programs fund. Again, this was created by Senate Bill 367, which is the Juvenile Justice Reform Act. And that the intent here is for all those savings that we've been realizing from since implementation through the reduced use of group homes and placement in the juvenile correctional facilities goes back into programs that are aimed at keeping youth from escalating further into the criminal justice system and trying to avoid incarceration. And then lastly, the budget recommendations from the governor includes the restoration of about $451,000 that had been previously taken out of the agency's budget as part of a budget reduction last session to restore 6 positions within the central office. Right now, we're using some one-time funds we've identified to sustain those 6 positions. Realize that we really need to keep those staff online in order to keep up with the workload that we have and all the initiatives we've got going on. And so with this additional funding that the governor's approved, we'll be able to keep those positions intact going into the new fiscal year. And then just briefly, I just want to touch on the performance measures that we utilize as part of performance-based budgeting. There should be some materials in your handouts there that list out all 199 of our performance measures across central office and the 9 facilities that we track on an annual basis to meet the performance-based budgeting requirements. And that covers all activities from administration to security and offender programs. At the end of the day, our ultimate measure and that of all corrections agencies is the recidivism rate, which unfortunately you can't really convert that into a one-year metric that fits performance-based budgeting, but this is the one we always keep coming back to, and that's based off of how many individuals return to prison within a 3-year period following their release. And looking at our most recent evaluation from 2017 releases, saw that 72.5% of the juveniles that released from KJCC over 3 years did not return to KJ or go to an adult facility, and that's up from 61% the prior period. And then on the adult side, 67.7% of adults who released from prison in 2017 did not return during that 3-year period. And that's up from 65.8% the previous reporting period. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll go ahead and stop here and stand for any questions that you may have.
Questions? Excuse me. Representative Ressman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as the 24/7 pay initiative, if that should go away, what do you anticipate would happen? Because right now it looks like you're increasing the number of employees.
With the governor's recommendation, that's fully funded through FY23. So I would anticipate, since that was fully funded for that fiscal year, it'd be in 24. But I think that's still up in the air exactly when that would be cut off, unless the secretary has any insight on that.
Afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, representative. So the 24/7 pay plan is funded this fiscal year, and the governor's recommendation is asking that it be funded next fiscal year. And we're hoping that that'll be funded if the pay. I think the question was if the pay plan was taken away. I think we would revert back to losing staff. We're not competitive in the market today. We're just not competitive. The pay plan helps us tremendously. We're starting, as Keith showed you, seeing some gains. They're modest, but it's early on. We're hoping that our vacancies will continue to decline. If the pay plan went away, I would suspect that would be reversed.
The dollar amount on the pay plan, what amount of vacancies or shrinkage were used when you computed that amount?
Not sure shrinkage was taken into an account for that. I think we're just looking solely at the available positions at the time that was calculated.
So just so that I understand, it was the total, probably, most likely, the total number of vacant positions times the pay rate, base pay rate. Well, probably not base pay rate, just the temporary.
Well, there are two separate components. One was the base pay increase. So that would have been looking at all existing positions that were filled at the time and how much it would be to add that pay increase for those individuals. And then the differentials based on the existing positions in anticipation that many of those vacancies would be filled to start bringing that number back down to where the vacancy rate back down to where we were back in July.
So the amount that it's based upon is filling every vacant position for an entire year with the base pay plus the temporary pay?
It wouldn't be every position. They would have taken into account some vacancies that occur. I believe it when it was calculated, it looked at what the vacancy rate was back in July. If you remember on that chart where it was
right
about where that was at, getting us back down to that level. We're always going to have some vacancies, so we always have to have some shrinkage built into that. So it wouldn't be 100% of our positions funded throughout the entire fiscal year. It would.
Could you give me some rough benchmarks on that?
I can see what I can get. Unfortunately, because each facility has a different rate, different historical vacancies, it gets a little complex, but we can get you something. Hopefully it's
something that kind of lets me know how much of it is. You know, sometimes people ask for, agencies will come in front of us and they'll ask for a pay increase for their agency. You know, the budget process, it doesn't go into effect till May, but because of the budgeting process, you make the request in like September. So they've got 9 months in, for instance, fiscal year 2022, and there's no way in reality that's the amount that gets passed through to the budget. And we do understand your vacancy rates, but trying to make sure we aren't over allocating in that area. Okay, thank you. Other questions? Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations on the 2017 cohort in terms of recidivism. Can you tell us where we land in all the 50 states for that rate? Or approximately?
We might be able to get that. I don't have that information with us right now.
All right, thank you.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is not much of a budget question, but and I think somebody asked this at another meeting. You when you're talking about doing expansion at the Winfield, which is that's all the same area that's connected to the uh, Kansas Veterans Home there, correct? And this is going to be for the older population that's going to be moved into those new expanded areas there.
Correct.
So, but they're not going to be in any close proximity to those veterans that are occupying some of those other cottages or other buildings in that same area. Is that correct?
That's correct. And so the two units that we're focused on, they're on the far end of their campus, right next to our campus. So you can walk around the warden's office and walk across the parking lot, and you're at that first unit. Part of this project involves the construction of a security fence around those two units, since it will be classified as medium security. And the other piece of this project is right now we share a kitchen with the Veterans Home. So we send crews from the correctional facility to that kitchen to work there. The meals prepared for both the Veterans Home and the correctional facility, and then they're trucked over to our campus where they're served in the basement, one of the old buildings there. So this project involves the construction of a new kitchen and dining facility for our population. So those residents who are currently working on the state house or the Veterans Home ground will now stay on our side of the campus. And then we also reduce the transportation issues, the food safety issues that go along with maintaining good food temperatures through that transport process.
Now that you said that, I do remember somebody saying that. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Can you give me a quick update on where we are on the Hep C? At one time, we had a huge backlog on that. Are we pretty well caught up on the backlog and just treating the new people as they come in?
Yes, we've made a great amount of headway on Hep C. So our backlogs have been eliminated. There is no backlog. Opt-out testing or opt-in testing is still provided upon admission to the reception diagnostic unit. Right now, we have a quarantine period because of COVID, but once that's over, if someone had tested positive for Hep C and they want to be treated, we'll start treatment right then and there. Bear with me, I'll find my numbers for you real quick. Where did I stick it at?
That's all right, Keith. You can get it to me later.
My recollection tells me we've treated 138 this year, and we have 29 or so that are currently on treatment.
Has the treatment price dropped any at all?
Don't have exact numbers on me right now. It has gone down a little bit,
But not substantially.
But not substantially. No.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
I just found
Oh.
28 were undergoing treatment as of January 28th. We have 96 that still require treatment, with 138 completed so far this fiscal year.
So there's 28 being treated now, 98 waiting, and you've already treated 136. Was that the right?
138, and we have 96 that require treatment still.
Okay. Well, if nobody has any further questions, thanks so much for your testimony. You're always so thorough. And if you could give me a list of the projects that you do have under consideration for ARPA, I'd appreciate being able to share that with appropriations. Thank you. All right. With nothing further before the committee, we're adjourned. We'll see everybody Monday, and we'll have budget hearings on the Kansas Highway Patrol and the Board of Indigent Defense Services. Thank you, everybody.